You know, when you think of Mao Zedong, the image that probably comes to mind is of a frugal, revolutionary leader. But what if that image isn't the whole story? Well, today, we're going to dig into a source that paints a very, very different picture, one of immense wealth and an almost imperial lifestyle.
For decades, right, the public image was all about austerity and living a simple life. But the source material we're looking at today just cuts right to the chase and asks a very direct question. Was his life really as simple as it was portrayed?
Okay, so the source's whole argument really kicks off with this number, and it's a big one, 75.8 million yuan. This was the alleged value of Mao's personal assets, mostly from book royalties, found in a bank account shortly after he died in 1976. To put that into perspective, at a time when an average worker was making just a few dozen yuan a month, this was an absolutely astronomical sum.
So how does the source even begin to build this case? Well, we're going to follow its argument through 5 key parts. We'll look at the vast fortune itself, the secret behind the royalties, the emperor-like life it allegedly paid for, the absolute privilege that came with it, and finally, the systemic roots that may have made it all possible.
All right, first up, let's talk about the foundation of this entire argument. We're talking about the sheer scale of this alleged fortune.
And wow, this slide really just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you've got his official state salary, 404.8 yuan a month. Now, that was already one of the highest salaries in the entire country. But then, on the other side, you see the alleged 75.8 million in royalties. It's that staggering gap right there that really frames the source's whole story.
Okay, but where in the world did all this money come from? That brings us to our second point, because, the source doesn't just throw out a big number and leave it at that. It really fundamentally questions where that money even came from in the first place.
So, the source makes a few really key points here. First, it claims that a lot of these works were actually ghost-written. And on top of that, many were just public documents or speeches, things that, by most standards, would be in the public domain, no copyright. But here's the real kicker, the crucial point it makes. The state itself apparently used its power to force people and organizations to buy these books. The state paid for the printing, the distribution, and then it also paid Mao personal royalties on top of all that. So the source is basically alleging this wasn't really a book sale at all. It was more like a direct transfer of state funds right into a personal account.
So once the source raises these questions about where the money came from, it then shifts to how that money was supposedly spent. And it paints a picture of a lifestyle that it compares to, well, that of an ancient emperor.
A key example it brings up? The regular dance parties held at Jiangnan High. The source claims these weren't just any parties. Young women were apparently hand-picked from military art troops to attend. It got to the point where one high-ranking official, Peng Dehuai, supposedly criticized them, calling the whole thing an imperial harem.
And get this, the source also alleges there was this massive network of 61 personal villas built all across the country. And we're not just talking about houses. They're described as modern-day palaces, often sealing off entire mountains or lake shores just for his exclusive use. And the wildest part? Some were reportedly only used for a few days, and some were never even visited at all.
And when it came to travel, according to the source, he had what was essentially a mobile palace. We're talking about a private 12-car armored train, imported all the way from Germany. It was basically a rolling home and office, not just for him, but for his huge entourage as well.
All right, so all of this leads into the next section, which explores the source's claims about the system of special supply that was supposedly built around him. A system designed to make sure every single need, every preference, was met by the state.
And this is a fantastic illustration of the sheer level of state resources we're talking about. The source describes this super elaborate 4-step process just for his food. It was supposedly modeled on both Soviet and ancient imperial methods. So, step 1, it starts at a dedicated farm producing crops and livestock just for him. Step 2, that food gets sent to a central supply station. Step 3, a lab tests everything for poison and nutritional value. And then finally, step 4, a designated food taster has to sample every single dish before it's ever served to him. Incredible!
But here's where the source really drives home its point. The absolutely jarring contrast between this kind of personal luxury and the widespread national hardship. It claims that even while the country was suffering through the Great Famine, special planes were being used to fly live fish from his favorite regions thousands of kilometers away straight to his kitchen in Beijing.
And the source gives these other examples to argue that even the most minor personal habits ended up creating entire state-funded teams. For instance, a whole group of master craftsmen was moved to Beijing to form the 132 group for the sole purpose of making his favorite type of cigar. A private film crew was set up just to shoot movies for his personal entertainment. And a porcelain factory was turned into a red official kiln, making exclusive tableware with thousands of extra pieces supposedly smashed just to make sure they stayed exclusive. Wow.
There's a quote from the source that just perfectly encapsulates its argument about the immense hidden cost behind all of this. It says, "What you see is one part, but what the country and the people need to pay for it is 10,000 parts." It really suggests that for every little bit of luxury you could see, there was a much, much bigger invisible cost being paid by the state and the people.
And all of this leads us to the source's final, and maybe its most important point. It kind of zooms out from the individual to look at the whole political system that allegedly made this lifestyle possible in the first place.
And the source makes a really fascinating comparison here. It argues that even back in ancient imperial China, there was a formal line drawn between the state treasury, the country's money, and the emperor's own private treasury. But it alleges that in Mao's time, that distinction was completely gone. State funds could apparently be used directly for any and all personal expenses.
So, the source wraps up by saying that this really wasn't just about one person's choices. It was about a whole system where providing this kind of privilege was just the norm. It claims there was almost zero institutional pushback. In fact, officials were supposedly competing with each other to offer more and more lavish services and accommodations.
And so we're left with the source's central, pretty provocative question, right? Was this a story about one man's personal choices, or was it the inevitable result of a political system that had few, if any, checks on its power? And that's really the final thought this source leaves us all to think about.